My name is Myra Spencer, and I'm 35 years old. The fluorescent lights of St. Catherine's Hospital hummed above me as I walked down the third-floor corridor, my white coat swishing against my scrubs, a tablet of patient charts tucked under my arm. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind that blurred into every other Tuesday I'd worked since the divorce, full of rounds and paperwork and the quiet satisfaction of a job that asked nothing of me except competence. I had built my entire life back from scratch in the 12 months since Adrian and I signed those papers, and most days, I didn't think about him at all. Until I turned the corner near the cardiology waiting area and saw her. Veronica Cole was sitting in one of the vinyl chairs, her purse clutched in her lap like a shield, and the moment her eyes landed on me, her whole posture changed. She stood up slowly, smoothing her blazer, and that smile crept across her face. The same smile she used to give me at family dinners right before she said something designed to cut. I hadn't seen her since the day I moved out of the house Adrian and I shared on Birchwood Lane, and somehow a year hadn't softened a single edge of her. "Myra," she said, drawing my name out like she was savoring it. "Well, isn't this a surprise? Still playing doctor here, are we?" I kept my expression neutral, the same expression I used when a patient's family member tried to provoke me into an argument I had no time for. "Veronica, I didn't know you came to this hospital. My sister's having a procedure," she said, waving a hand dismissively, like the actual reason she was there mattered less than the conversation she was about to start. She stepped closer, and I caught the scent of the same perfume she'd worn for the 15 years I'd known her, sharp and floral and faintly suffocating. "But I have to say, running into you like this feels almost like fate. I've been wanting to tell you something for a long time." I didn't ask what. I learned a long time ago that Veronica didn't need an invitation. "Leaving you was the best decision my son ever made," she said, her voice pitched just loud enough for the people in the waiting room to hear, just soft enough to pretend it was private. "Now he has a baby boy with your best friend." There it was. The thing she'd clearly been waiting a year to say, polished and rehearsed, delivered with the satisfaction of someone who believed they were detonating a bomb. I thought about Olivia, about the years we'd spent as roommates in college, about the bridesmaid dress she wore at my wedding, about the calls that stopped coming 6 months before my marriage ended, and the reason I never understood until much later. I thought about how I was supposed to feel hearing this news from the mouth of a woman who'd never once tried to hide how much she disliked me. And what I felt, standing there in my white coat with a chart still tucked under my arm, was nothing close to what Veronica expected. "Is that what you believe?" I said. It wasn't sharp. It wasn't even particularly loud. But something in the way I said it made her smile falter for the first time, just slightly, like she'd expected tears or anger and gotten neither. She blinked, recalibrating, opening her mouth to say something else, something to sharpen the blade she thought she'd already buried in me. "I just think you should know what you lost," she pressed on, though the certainty in her voice had thinned. "A grandson. A real family. Everything you couldn't give him." I didn't answer right away. I glanced past her shoulder at the clock on the wall, then back at her face, at the lines around her mouth that deepened when she was pleased with herself. Patients shuffled past us in wheelchairs. A nurse called a name over the intercom. Life kept moving around the two of us, and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her, for how much energy she'd spent constructing a moment she thought would break me. "You should get back to your sister," I said finally, stepping to the side to pass her. That was when the door at the end of the corridor opened. A man walked through it, tall, dressed in a charcoal suit instead of scrubs, carrying himself with the kind of quiet authority that made the nurses near the nurses' station straighten without realizing they'd done it. He scanned the hallway once, and then his eyes found mine, and something in his face softened in a way that had nothing to do with hospital protocol. "Myra," he said, crossing the distance between us in a few easy strides. Veronica's head turned sharply toward him, and I watched the recognition hit her in real time, watched the color drain out of her face like someone had pulled a plug somewhere beneath her skin. Her mouth opened, but for the first time since I'd known her, no words came out at all. Julian reached me first, his hand finding the small of my back in a gesture so natural it barely registered as a gesture at all, just the easy rhythm of two people who had learned each other's spaces. "Sorry I'm late," he said, glancing at his watch. The board meeting ran long. Dr. Whitfield wouldn't stop talking about the new wing. "You're fine," I said, and something in my voice must have carried more than I intended, because his eyes flicked toward Veronica, taking in her frozen expression, the purse still clutched against her chest like it might shield her from whatever was happening. "Mrs. Cole," he said, his tone polite but unmistakably formal, the kind of formal that comes from familiarity rather than distance. "I didn't expect to see you here." Veronica's mouth opened and closed twice before anything came out. "Julian," she finally managed, the name sounding foreign in her mouth, like she was testing whether it was really true. "You two know each other?" "We're getting married in the spring," I said simply, and I watched the words land on her like a slow-moving wave, watched her try to reconcile the image she'd built of me, divorced and discarded and presumably alone, with the reality standing in front of her. But that wasn't what made her face lose its color. That came a few seconds later, when Julian turned to me and said, almost as an afterthought, "I meant to call you earlier. The audit on Cole Industries came back this morning. We found enough discrepancies in the quarterly filings to bring it to the full board tonight." I felt Veronica go rigid beside me before I even understood what he meant. "Cole Industries," she repeated, her voice thin. "You're talking about my husband's company." "Adrian's company." Julian glanced at her, and I could see him recalculating, realizing the conversation he thought was background noise had just become very personal to the woman standing 3 feet away. "I run capital allocation for the firm that holds the majority stake," he said carefully. "We've had concerns about the books for months. This morning, we confirmed there's been money moved out of client accounts that shouldn't have been touched. Adrian's name is attached to most of the transfers." The waiting room around us seemed to go quiet, though I knew it hadn't. Not really. I just couldn't hear anything past the sound of Veronica's breathing, sharp and uneven, the sound of a woman watching her son's entire life come apart in real time, delivered by the same calm, unhurried voice that had just told me about a board meeting running long. "That's not possible," she said, but there was no conviction in it anymore. "Adrian wouldn't. He's careful. He's always been careful with money." "I'm sorry," Julian said, and he meant it, because that was who he was, kind even when delivering news that would have made other men gloat. "There's a meeting tonight to decide what happens next. I'd imagine he'll be hearing from legal before the day's over." I thought about Olivia then, about the life Veronica had described to me with such relish only minutes earlier. The baby boy, the happy little family that was supposed to prove I'd been the problem all along. I wondered if Olivia knew yet. I wondered how long that happiness would last once the accounts were frozen and the lawyers started calling and the company that funded their entire lifestyle collapsed under the weight of whatever Adrian had been hiding. "I should go," Veronica said abruptly, color still drained from her face, her composure cracking at the edges in a way I had genuinely never seen before. She turned without saying goodbye, walking quickly toward the elevators, her heels clicking unevenly against the tile. I didn't feel triumphant watching her go. That surprised me more than anything else that had happened in the last 10 minutes. I had spent so long imagining what it would feel like to see her humbled, and now that it had actually happened, all I felt was a quiet, settled peace, the kind that comes from realizing you no longer need someone else's downfall to feel whole. "You okay?" Julian asked, turning to face me fully, his hand finding mine. "I am," I said, and for the first time in a long time, I meant it completely. A year ago, I'd stood in a courtroom signing papers that ended a marriage I thought would last my whole life, and I'd wondered, in the quiet moments after, whether I'd ever feel steady again. I hadn't expected the answer to come in a hospital hallway, delivered by a woman who'd spent 15 years believing I was the disappointment in her son's life. But there it was, undeniable, standing right in front of me in the shape of everything I'd rebuilt without even realizing I was building it. Adrian's mother had wanted me to feel small that day. Instead, I walked out of that hospital corridor with Julian's hand in mine, lighter than I'd felt in years, finally understanding that the best revenge isn't the one you plan. It's the one that simply happens because you kept living your life with your head held high while everyone else assumed you'd fall apart. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever had someone try to make you feel small for a life you didn't choose, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button before you go. I share these stories every week. Real moments of betrayal, resilience, and the kind of justice that arrives when you least expect it, and I'd love to have you along for the next one. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.